Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Sunday Forum series. It's a delight again to introduce for you Dr. Robert Miller, Area Director of Biblical Studies at the Catholic University of America, who is also involved in some grants that Catholic has received regarding science and religion. So most of you, I think, saw him last week. He's again with us this week. If you did not get to see him last week, the video is online on our website, and you can see it there. So thank you, Dr. Moore.
I want to look at the second creation account, which we have in Genesis chapter 2. And it really is a second account. So Genesis 1 creates the whole world, and then Genesis 2 starts over again. And the animals are created again, and the people are created again, and there are a lot of differences. Genesis 2 is probably a much older story. I'm not that confident that we can give exact dates to these things, but comparatively at least, Genesis 2 is a considerably older story. And it's a really different kind of way of communicating. So Genesis 1, as we sort of saw, and I gave you this handout last time, has this poetic structure, and through the poetry tries to communicate what it's trying to say about basic philosophical questions. Genesis 2 is just a story. It's a narrative. It isn't poetry, although it has some snatches of poetry here and there. But it's still trying to communicate higher truths or philosophical truths. And this was common with the creation stories of Israel's neighbors, which looked a lot more like Genesis 2 than Genesis 1. But they're always about not what happened way back in time. How did we get to be this way? They're always about how are things today? What is the nature of the universe? They tell you what the nature of people is, what the nature of people's relationship to animals is, and people's relationship male to female, and so forth, whether it's a Babylonian story or Genesis chapter 2. So it's a task then of us to try to read this and not look at it as, wow, that was really a primitive way of thinking, but rather to try to pick out what are they trying to say here. And so I want to focus on three different parts of Genesis chapter 2 that I think we'll have time to look at. And then if we have some more time, we can come back and fill in some of the other details as we get closer to 11. And what I thought I would do is the same as I did last time, which is sort of pass my Bible around so that other people can read aloud, and we can sort of go verse by verse. So I'm going to start it here, Leslie. And if you could read Genesis chapter 2, verses 4 and 5.
The Garden of Eden. This is the story of the heavens and the earth and their creation, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. There was no field shrub on earth, and no grass of the field had sprouted. For the Lord God had sent no rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the ground.
Okay, what interests me there is that it suggests a purpose or a job for people. What did it say? To till the ground. This comes up again in verse 15. Can you ask him to read verse 15? I think it may be on the next page, or maybe on that page, I'm not sure.
The Lord God then took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it.
To cultivate and care for it. Now this is interesting because, if you read the, I don't know, I'm thinking about like the comics in the Sunday newspaper. Eden, if they depict the Garden of Eden, isn't it just like people laying around in lawn chairs eating nacho chips or something? This says we have to work in Eden. This is meant to be paradise. In fact, in the Greek, the word is paradise, the Garden of Eden. But twice we're told to till the ground, and then after the garden and the human are created, the human is put in the garden to till it and to care for it. Even though it's at the end of chapter 3, after the sin, that punishment is now you will eat by the sweat of your brow, and you'll have to The ground will produce thistles and thorns, and it'll be really hard to farm. Yet this somehow suggests that the picture of life, if nothing had ever gone wrong, if there had been no sin, was not laying around doing nothing. What is that trying to say about human nature? I think it's trying to say something about human nature.
Maybe that people need a purpose.
Yeah, I think that's it, that people need a purpose. That, we're used to thinking of work as negative. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, it is. And in spite of the fact that we have a culture that largely sees work as negative and yet increasingly tries to do it at every moment, so that you're answering, text from the office the second you wake up in the morning, and all day Saturday and all day Sunday still becomes work. At the same time, we say, thank God it's Friday, or I can't wait till I can get to Cancun, or whatever. I think that this is promoting a different sort of image, which is that you have to have purpose. You have to have a vocation. You have to have work, not in the sense of toil. Toil is what comes at the end of chapter 3. Toil is the consequence of people messing up their relationship with nature and with each other and so forth. But its vision of an ideal world is not a world of complete leisure. Somehow work, productivity, creativity is part of that ideal world. This is really difficult, I think, sometimes for us to understand. And there is a notion that circulated among some medieval Renaissance philosophers that even talk about the primacy of work, not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense, that you need to work, you need to be productive. I found a great little quote from Evelyn Underhill, and I can't remember where she wrote this because I just cut and pasted it without writing down the source of it. She says, "Work is my gift to the world. It is my social fruitfulness. It ties me to my neighbor and binds me to the future." And I like this because it's not just work so that I have a reward and feel like I've accomplished something. It ties me to my neighbor because I'm doing something that will benefit other people and to future generations. It lights up that spark in me that is most like the God of Genesis, who worked for 6 days. And then her example, "I tidy the garden and plant the garden and distribute the goods of the garden, and I know that it is good." So even in this, minor little task, and it's interesting that she says garden, because that's precisely the role that the man, the human, is given in Genesis 2, is to be a gardener. Think of a gardener, not a farmer. A farmer, you might think of labor and toil. A gardener, usually your garden is fun. And for her, my garden is me creating and looking on it and seeing that it is good, like God in Genesis chapter 1. The words that are actually used there, where it says to till and tend the garden, have a lot to say about human relationship to nature. So it's not just a statement about work and the need for a vocation. I think it's an actual sort of environmental statement, because there are two words there. One is to till, but the basic word means to serve. It's avad. Avad means to serve. And so the vision of a human is kind of serving nature, not in the sense of worshiping nature, but in the sense of I'm going to cultivate, I'm going to help it, I'm going to prune, I'm going to plant, I'm going to fertilize. And then the second word that's translated there, to tend, so you had to till and to tend, literally to serve and to guard, or to serve and to preserve. That works good, serve and preserve. It sounds the same. Again, I mentioned this with Genesis 1. It's not an image of destroying nature. There's really a mandate here to have a stewardship relationship over nature. And this ought to give us sort of a basis for environmentalism, to see that the relationship of humans to nature is not to destroy it, We're not meant to be parasites on the earth, and we're not parasites on the earth, but we do have a positive relationship. But that relationship is to preserve it and improve it, not to destroy it. Let's jump down to verse 7. Would you read verse 7? Just keep passing my Bible around. So, yeah, you have to go back a page, I think. You have like 2 pages back.
Sorry.
So chapter 2, verse 7.
Then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being.
Okay, they're trying to communicate something here. We've heard this story. We know this before. Nobody ever took this literally. It's not like we took this literally until Darwin. There's a quote that I often give when I'm teaching this in Catholic U, where St. Augustine says, even if the text says this, the idea that God formed man with physical hands and breathed into him is altogether too childish to believe. So Augustine knew this was figurative. Babylonian creation accounts say almost the same thing. To make a human, you mold it out of the dirt, out of the earth, and then all the gods would spit into the dirt as it was being molded. Or sometimes they would actually kill one of the gods and mix the blood with the dirt. When they say that, I hear them saying philosophically the same thing as Israel when you have to blow in, God must blow into the molded earth to make a human being. I think they're trying to tell me the same thing about what a human is. What is that trying to say? That you mold the earth and then you blow into it, or you put divine spit into it. What is that saying? What did they think people were? Yeah.
What I understand from that is that a human being is made of 2 aspects. The physical being and the spiritual.
Yeah, I think that's it. And that was not an unusual idea. Their neighbors thought the same thing. Nobody thought that we were gods. Nobody thought that we were the same as sheep. So and we have something that we share with the rest of the world, and the rest of the animals will also be created out of the earth. And yet there's something different. There's something spiritual about us, something that we share with God. He breathes into the human being and it becomes alive. There's a pun at work here, and that's what I put up here. It says human being in that translation, and the word translated human being is just Adam. Later it becomes a proper name, Adam. But at this point, it's always got the word the on it. So it's the Adam, meaning the human being. And what the human being was formed from was the dust of the Adamah. Adamah means soil. And it's not just dirt or earth. It's Adamah is earth that you can plant things in and they'll grow. So the soil in a desert is not Adamah. And that's really I like the English word soil, because it means more than just dirt. Soil is something you plant in. So this, to me, goes back with this idea of the primal human being a gardener, in a way. That, because some people have tried to say, how can we produce this sort of pun in English? And they've said, well, you're the earthling from the earth. But that doesn't quite catch it, because the word there isn't referring to the planet, it's referring to the soil. I've heard people say human from humus, but then you have to tell people what humus means in English, which is very helpful. But Adamah, and there's a triple pun, Adom means red, because the earth is red in Canaan, and sort of a newborn human is kind of red. So the main pun, though, I think, is here, that you are, not only are you one who cares for the soil, but you're really made of the soil. You are one with nature, and you're a soil person. Can you read that verse one more time, verse 7?
Then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being.
Yeah, notice how it's worded. God didn't insert a soul into this person. That is not the way Israel thinks about human beings. It would be too easy to look at that verse and kind of misread it and hear it as God made a body and then blew a soul into it. We are constantly throughout history tempted to think of ourselves as not our bodies. This is, Gnosticism is an old heresy, and we still, say this to people, that's just my body. The real me is inside. There's problems with that, and you can get into all sorts of negative self-image and other issues when you start thinking that way. You are one thing. To think that you are actually two things, or I have a soul, it's in me some way, maybe it's my head, must be in my head, somewhere is where my soul lives. That stuff goes back to René Descartes and to Plato, really, even before him. Hebrew thought is not like that at all. It says God formed the human being, not a body, formed a person. And he breathed into him the breath of life, not a soul, and he became a living being. All the breath does is it distinguishes between living and non-living. So when a person dies, they don't think of the soul leaving the body and floating away somewhere. They think of the life leaving the person. The breath of life left the person. But the person is a unity. Americans are very uncomfortable with this, and in the Catholic Church we almost never use the Apostles' Creed, and I think it's because when people hear resurrection of the body, they get, ooh, that doesn't sound nice at all. I just want to be a free floating spirit, on clouds. But a full person is body and spirit and whatever you want to call it, mind, intelligence, and physicality. And Israel's religion is never a head thing. It's not a head trip. It's a body, embodied spirituality, which obviously then you could never get something like the incarnation in a religion that thought body evil. Israel doesn't think the body is somehow more evil than the soul. It doesn't even see a difference between those two things. All right, let's jump down again. If you could hand the Bible back there behind you. And I want to look at the male-female relationship, which also in the same passage tells us about people and animals. So would you read verses 18, 19, and 20?
The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suited to him." So the Lord God formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the air, and he brought them to the man to see what he would call them. Whatever the man called each living creature was then its name. The man gave names to all the tame animals, all the birds of the air, and all the wild animals, but none proved to be a helper suited to the man.
Right, now there's a lot locked up in here about both human relationship with animals and also with male and female. Let me start with the male and female, because it says what we're looking for, and that translation said a helper suited for the man. It's an awkward term. There's two words, and they're really difficult to translate. The first word is easy, helper. But even that, it doesn't mean assistant. Helper doesn't mean someone to take the trash out, someone to iron the shirts. It's a helper, I'm going to use the Hebrew here just because it's helpful to me. Ezer, it's two words, Ezer Benegdo. The first word is helper, Ezer, which is help as in the sense of essential aid. Help, this is what you shout if you're in Israel. You say, Azor li, send me the police, send me an ambulance. Azor or Ezer is that kind of help. It's not like, The Help, the movie The Help. It's help, I need I'm on fire or something like that. So it's not an assistant. It's a life-saving help, a life-saving urgent aid. All of those things sound subordinate, but the ambulance is not subordinate to you when it comes to you. You follow their instructions. And so try to think of help in the sense of an ambulance or urgent care or something like that. And then the second half that's translated suitable to him, fitting, the old King James put these together as a help meet. This is difficult to translate because it's actually just a bunch of prepositions. It says a helper like, negdo is facing or opposite. A helper like facing him. That doesn't make any sense. A helper like opposite him. They've literally strung together like opposite him. What I think they're trying to get at here is a helper that is both like him and then kind of his reciprocal. It's not identical. You could easily just provide a clone, Adam 2, and who would think exactly the same thoughts and move in exactly the same ways and always be, of one mind. But that's not the idea here. The idea is that the relationship between men and women is one of mutual life-giving aid and at the same time a sort of oppositeness, a sort of counterpart, a sort of even contradiction, and that there's great value in that contradiction, in that kind of parity, and yet at the same time almost oppositeness. It's an interesting philosophical reflection on men and women.
Does it mean as much as completion?
It could mean completion. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, but you've got two opposites, and so, yeah, you've really got the whole between the two.
Maybe balancing.
Yes, and in fact, one of the medieval rabbis says it's an equal weight on the scale. And that's the image that the rabbi had. I can't remember which rabbi, but she's an equal weight on the scale to him. And even though completely different, they're facing each other. However, we don't just get the woman. Instead, God goes through this very strange sort of charade. Now, does God actually think that these other things will work? I mean, Israel doesn't really believe God is stupid. And so why would they do this? Why would they say, so then God says, how about a bear? Would you like a bear? No, I don't want a bear. How about this little fish? Will that be, is that your helper like you? I mean, it becomes a very strange image of God. Why doesn't he just bring the woman? Why go through the rigmarole of dogs and cows and everything else? Yeah.
Because surely we find completion and balance in creation as a whole.
Yes, that is part of it, that all of these things have to be somewhat, but not completely, helper. And if you look there closely, there are no fish. It's only the animals that really could be of some help to humans that are brought there. That's part of it. What else? Why not just cut to the chase and bring the woman in the first place? Who gets to decide? Go ahead.
It seems important that he's naming the other animals.
Yeah, that's part of it, so that there's time to name the animals. Now that is really important because they understand naming very different than we do. To name is to have power over it, to have authority over it. I mean, we still sort of get this thing. If you adopt a dog and it comes with the name Fifi and you say, no, this is Rex. Now it's Rex. And you've changed its whole identity. And that's what it says. It says whatever the man called it, that was its name. It's not just this one's called a hen and this one's called a rooster and this one's called a raccoon. the human is giving them their sort of purpose and identity in the universe. There are texts from Babylon that have a specific God who's always in charge of doing this. He names the different animals and he names the different plants. The other neighbors of Israel would never have given this task to a human being. This is God's role to determine, okay, cows, you are supposed to give milk. Donkeys, you are supposed to pull plows. I mean, they're assigning the purpose. And so it's part what Genesis 1 calls have dominion. Genesis 2 writes this way in a narrative. You have the authority to dictate really what these creatures are. The other reason, there's one other reason God doesn't just bring the woman. Who got to decide which creature was the helper like opposite him? Yes, the man. This is God who delegates. We saw God who delegates in chapter 1. God gives a lot of autonomy and authority to people. It's the people's decision what the purpose of the animals is. It's the people's decision to say which is the fitting partner and which one isn't. God is not dictating everything. Now, let's keep reading and see what happens. Verses 21 to 24.
So the Lord God cast a deep sleep on the man, and while he was asleep, he took out one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. The Lord God then built the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman. When he brought her to the man said, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one has been taken. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two of them become one body."
Yeah, the pun there is a pun in Hebrew of ish and isha, which is woman and man, and it works in English too, man and woman. The pun works. Is he naming her? Because there would be a lot of reason, there would be a lot of meaning if he was. Read it again, what the first thing he says to her is, or first thing he says when he sees her.
When he sees her. This one at last, that part?
Yeah.
This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one has been taken.
This is an argument between scholars, but to me there's something odd there. It's this one shall be called woman. If I wrote that on my word processor, Microsoft Word's going to underline it in green and ask me to change it. Why? What does Word not like?
Shall be.
Sorry?
Shouldn't be shall be.
Right.
Yes.
It doesn't like passive voice. This is the passive voice. This one shall be called woman. This is important to me. At the end of the story, after Genesis 3, after the sin, after when God shows up and says, "Why'd you eat the fruit?" and the man says, "Oh, that woman, she made me do it." And the two of them hate each other now. It says, the man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of the living. And people think that's wonderful news. Mother of the living, how pretty. And I think that's terrible. The man named his wife. That's authority. That's patriarchy. And it fits with just a few verses before where it says, the woman's will be against her husband, but he will rule over her. That's patriarchy. That's the way ancient Israel was. Women had no status. She was the property of her father until she was married, then she's her husband's property. Israel says that's not the intended way the universe should be. That's the result of human selfishness, of human ego and pride. And the way they say that, when the woman is created, the man says, "This one shall be called by other people who are not me, woman." They've bent over backwards to avoid saying he named her woman. He named the animals. He did not name her. He bent over backwards, or the text bent over backwards to keep him from naming her and yet still get that word woman in. You got to get the word in. So this one shall be called by other people who don't happen to exist yet, woman. And then later we'll say, when everything's messed up, when you're dust and to dust you will return, the man named his wife Eve. That's bad news. This is really radical, because in a society where it was completely accepted wisdom that women needed to be property and needed to be under the authority of their parents, Israel dares to say, that's the way things are now, yes, but it's not the way God intended the world to be. They didn't see a way out of it. For them, it was just the way things were, but they still sort of thought, in an ideal world, and I wonder if they thought, when they talk about that wonderful world where the lion and the sheep will lie down together and the little child plays with the snake, is that then the end of this? Will we go back then to the equality that's envisioned at the beginning? An opposite like facing him. They're equal on the balance. They're equal on the scale. And when he sees her, this one is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. There's complete equality and identity there between the two. It's only because things got messed up, and you'd have to spend a lot of time looking at Genesis 3. I also don't think they thought Genesis 3 was one sin that happened way back in time to a given guy and a given woman. I think they thought it was just a way of saying that as far back as you can go, people have rebelled against each other and looked to their own ego and will more than anybody else's from the earliest part of humankind. But they're saying it's because of that. It's because of our own actions and attitudes that there is not an equality between men and women. Believe it or not, it's 11 already, but we have time for questions.
I'm just wondering about how the reaction would be of the Babylonians hearing that part of the story. What was it like in their culture?
Yeah, no, women are, there's a wonderful story that in many ways is good, where it takes always these two gods to make people. There's a woman, a female goddess who molds the people, and then another god who provides the divine spit or breath or whatever. And they get into this debate at a bar at the end after they've created men. And she says, I bet I can make a creature that you can't find anything for it to do. And the nice thing about this text is she goes through and she makes various kinds of disabilities. And in every case, the God is able to find a function for them in society. In other words, here are people who are deaf. I have a role for them. Here's a job that they can do. And it goes through various kinds of disabilities that would have been known in the ancient world, and the God is able to find a job for each of them. But women is one category. So the Babylonians thought of women as kind of deformed men. Or just, they can bear children. Here's a function for them. They would not, the Babylonians and nobody else had this kind of equanimity. I mean, the Greek creation accounts do kind of give men and women a little sort of equality, but not ancient